Welcome to Quick Hits, a JFK assassination news and notes podcast with your hosts, Rob Clark and Doug Campbell.
Thank you, Grant, and welcome to Quick Hits, a JFK assassination research news and notes podcast. I am Rob Clark, host of the Lone Gunman podcast.
And this is Doug Campbell, host of the Dallas Action, presented by Wall Street Window. Rob, I guess we should jump right into it. There have been some more passings. Some more people have passed to the great beyond, connected to either directly or tangentially to the narrative of the JFK assassination. Folks heavily entwined in it. And the first we want to touch on is the infamous anti-communist intelligence honey trap, Marita Lorenz, who passed away on August 31st of this year, apparently, in Oberhausen, Germany, at the age of 80.
Wow, she lived a nice long life, didn't she?
A nice long life. She either knew, I guess that means she either didn't know anything or knew a lot and was able to use that for her longevity.
She didn't catch anything from Castro, so that's good.
Well, what a story she had. I don't think we can deny that she was definitely associated with the people that she claims to have been associated. I know there are a lot of people that believe her story and a lot of people that don't. Where do you fall there with Marita Lorenz?
Well, I think there's a little bit of truth in her story, but I think overall, I just don't believe the whole thing. At least the Dallas part,
Well, yeah, and we'll get into that in just a minute. But there's, there are a lot of people tangentially and directly connected to this narrative where, again, it's like Jerry Hemming and E. Howard Hunt and Frank Sturgis and different people.
Jack Ruby,
Lee Oswald, but specifically witnesses, people who claim to have known things like Hemming reminds me of Lorenz, obviously very knowledgeable, but separating what's true from what is diversionary BS is the task at hand, and it's not always easy to do. And I think that Lorenz and Gerald Patrick Hemming, they're similar in that manner. Now, I guess Lorenz's biggest claim to fame would be being the subject of, in the center of the big Mark Lane book, Plausible Denial. This book, I'm sure you've read, right?
Yes.
Now, for those who may not be familiar, I'm going to read a little bit about Lane and his book, Rob. It says here in this article, and I apologize, I did not write down exactly where I got this particular article, but it says Mark Lane, the lawyer whose rush to judgment was the first in a flood of books calling into question the Warren Commission report, has come up with a highly unusual angle this time. He tells in enormous but only occasionally tedious detail the story of a little publicized 1985 trial in which he figured and which ended in a Florida jury endorsing the notion. That's right. He convinced a Florida jury that the CIA was involved in Kennedy's killing. The case actually arose out of a libel suit brought by CIA officer E. Howard Hunt and later Watergate burglar, the Eduardo in her story, against Liberty Lobby and its magazine Spotlight. And if you remember, he sued them over the notion, Rob, I believe that there was a memo that said that one day the CIA would have to explain Howard Hunt's presence in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. Now, I've heard a lot about that memo too, and it was the center of the Liberty Lobby article, but have you ever actually read that memo or seen it?
Yeah, but
really,
please
it
make
exists.
me say that name. I cannot pronounce that name. As fans of my podcast, I've heard me try many, many times. It's a bit of a tongue twister for me, but yeah, just tell everybody about the note, because I mean it's the key thing that Mark Lane was trying to put through in his book. And
right. The note, you talking about the letter she wrote to the HSCA?
Yeah.
It was
giant long, what is it, 27 pages or something?
27 pages. It's really, and back to what we were talking about before, her living a long life. She lived a very interesting life too. I was not aware that I found this little nugget in a just about her early upbringing. She was her father was actually a Nazi U-boat commander. He commanded like a whole brigade of them. But her mother, after they were liberated by the Allies, her and her mother, they moved to Bremerhaven, and Alice, who was Marita Lorenz's mother, began working for United States Army Intelligence. Did you know that in the late 40s? She was apparently, her mother, a United States Army Intelligence asset up until the 60s.
I did not know that.
It's true. It says here, Alice went to work for U.S. Army Intelligence and later the OSS, the forerunner of the CIA. In the 1950s, the family moved to the States and eventually settled in Manhattan. Lorenz's sister said, I was never sure who my mother was working for, our sister Valerie, except I knew she was working in intelligence and had a high security clearance. She didn't confide in me, but she was very close with Marita. I was raising 3 children in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, while Marita and my mother were off to God knows where. That's pretty interesting, But what she basically, let's read. I actually clipped out a few screenshots of this long letter she wrote, and I believe I have it written down here in 1978. I believe this letter was written by Marita Lorenz to the House Select Committee on Assassinations. And she claims that she had a baby, she had a child, by the ex-president of what country was he president of? Costa Rica, Marcos Perez Jimenez. I can't remember here. It says
no idea.
Yeah, but he was in exile in the United States, and he finally got sent back. Robert Kennedy, according to her, had Jimenez sent back to face. Look that up, Rob, while I'm reading here. But he was extradited back to his home country to face trial by the Kennedys. And this is where I picked it up here in her letter. It says, I felt lost and drifted back to my old associates, Frank Fiorini Sturgis and his followers, the International Anti-Communist Brigade, Miami, Florida. I owe Frank Fiorini and Alex Rourke my life after my close personal involvement with Dr. Fidel Castro Ruiz. I was active in Miami toward the end of 1959, became a member of the brigade, and took, get this, Marita says, and took a blood oath to join Frank Fiorini's secret assassination group in the early 60s. Frank Fiorini, of course, is Frank Sturgis, who later on was, again, one of the Watergate burglars. She goes on here, Rob. I noticed a change in Frank Fiorini after the aborted Bay of Pigs invasion. And instead of serious and angry words of getting rid of Fidel Castro, it was now Kennedy has to be hit. Years before, Frank Fiorini was my troop commander and trained me to ship back into Cuba in 1960 with poison capsules for Fidel Castro. Now, she gets into then meeting who? Lee Oswald. You remember that part? This is on page 5. It says Frank Sturgis, Ozzy. She knew Lee Oswald as Ozzy. Others, Cubans in our group. We drove in 2 cars to the home of Orlando Bosch. It wasn't unusual for Frank Fiorini to study maps. In the past, often we studied waterways, tides, currents, inland, islands in the Bahamas, where I was to navigate stolen craft laden with arms to a certain destination, later to be picked up by others. So, according to her, they've got her hauling stolen guns all over the Caribbean by herself as a boat captain. What do you think about that?
Sounds a little far-fetched, but considering her pedigree, I mean, you never really know, man.
You never know.
And just it was Venezuela, man.
Venezuela. Wow. How did I forget that? You know, it's actually, I flipped 2 pages on my thing and it's right there. So, what are you going to do? But thank you. So she's talking about a secretive meeting in Orlando Bosch's home. I do know that Fiorini and Bosch were operational together. That is for certain. But here she gets into, I believe, her confrontation, Rob, with Lee Oswald. This certain highly secret meeting in Bosch's home was to discuss certain streets in Dallas, Texas. I was under the impression we were to take another armory. Excuse me. Of course, she's talking about the, like the, what was it, Home of Louisiana powder magazine that was raided. Yeah. I paid little attention and thought more of how I would start life again with my new baby. There was talk of highly powerful rifles, discussions of feet, buildings, timings, contacts, silence, etc. In Bosch's house that evening, I called Ozzy, again, this is what she refers to Lee Harvey Oswald as, Ozzy, a chivato to Frank. And when Ozzy challenged me, I asked him, how did you know the meaning of that word? It was Fidel's favorite word for informant and traitor. Oswald said he heard it in Cuba.
Huh.
And of course, then we get to the trip to Dallas, where it's 2 carloads of people, the Diaz-Lanz brothers, Sturgis, who else? Now, didn't she claim that Jerry Hemming was in this motorcade of vehicles also?
I believe so. And of course, he denies it.
He denies it. He did. I have seen a clip of an interview of Mr. Hemming on YouTube where he claims that he was invited to take part in a caravan to Dallas, but he declined. And even he says, now, if this is the one she's talking about, it might be the one she's talking about. It might not. He didn't know, just that he was invited. But they all go to Dallas, and they all check into a motel on the outskirts of Dallas. They got a couple of rooms. Orlando Bosch was there also. She goes on to write. Now, remember, this is the story that Mark Lane was able to convince a Florida jury in 1985 was true. She says only Sturgis and Bosch were to answer the phone if and when it rang. That night, Frank waited for a member named Ruby. That's in quotes. Frank spoke to him outside in the parking lot. This Ruby seemed surprised at my presence and questioned Frank about me. I later told Frank, where'd you get the mafia punk? What's really going on here? What the hell are we really here for? Frank studied me, escorted me outside. He replied by saying, you make the men nervous. I made a mistake. This is too big. I want you to go back to Miami. Take the baby and go home. See, now, has the story changed at this point that she actually had the baby on this assassination trip with this hit team?
Yeah, that's a little far-fetched for me. I don't think that Sturgis would allow that to happen, knowing the gravity of the situation and what's involved. And bring your baby. I mean, can't you find a babysitter? I mean, damn.
Yeah. Take the baby and go home. That is amazing to me. That reminds me of the story that Judith Very Baker tells of that nonsense story of Lee Oswald going to Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and bringing back radioactive material in the diaper bag. I mean, it's come on, man. Really? You expect me to believe that? And it's sort of the same thing, it's just too incredulous because, a real live covert ops team wouldn't let a baby within 1,000 miles of one of their vehicles. It's the most ridiculous thing in the world.
Unless they were trying to use that as a cover for something, you know what I mean? Like we need a woman and a baby, for this certain thing, but
like
said anything like that,
like the baby in the diaper bag, or along with 6 rough-looking Cuban guys in a 58 Oldsmobile is going to keep the cop from popping the trunk and finding the 6.30 rifles.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
it's part of a cover story. Okay, that's somewhat believable, but she doesn't say anything like that.
No. But later on, she decides, Rob, she says she wants to leave. She doesn't want any part of whatever is going on in Dallas that weekend. She says she agreed, and she didn't like his selection of men, Ozzy, Ruby, who were new and not true members. As I was leaving, and this word's in quotes, Eduardo, parenthetically, Howard Hunt, drove up, and there was discussion on who would drive me to the airport. For Miami, Frank and Bosch did. Eduardo waited at the motel. In the real world, if I were her, I would worry. I would want to sit in the front seat and let one of them get behind me. I would worry that I would make it to the airport at that point in a reality type situation.
Yeah, because now she knows too much.
Now she knows too much. Well, her story certainly was and is interesting. I'm like you. There's she knew all the right players to put in it, and there's also, you can't doubt what happened in the late 70s around this time between her, Sturgis. Frank Sturgis was literally arrested, in the hallway of her apartment building about to go pop her.
Right.
This is reality. This is reality. I know the detective's name. His last name was Rothstein. Can't remember his first name. Jim Rothstein. Yeah. I mean, Sturgis was like creeping her hallway. And this was after all this came out to the HSCA. And they caught him. He was just about to disappear her. And that is an amazing, amazing truth, So there's got to be some truth to Marita Lorenz's story, I would think.
Yeah, for sure. Just not the whole thing, but I think there's some kernels of truth, or as Thomas Beckham would say, remnants of truth in her story somewhere.
And Mr. Beckham, we know you're listening. Come on the show anytime. Rob, moving on. Rob, there was another passing of someone who was witness to the conspiracy, right?
There was, and his name was Robert McClelland.
Dr. Robert McClelland.
Yep, and he was the chief of surgery at Parkland Hospital. When they rushed JFK there after he was shot.
Yes, sir.
In 1963, McClelland was 34 years old, and when the mortally wounded JFK was brought to Trauma Room 1, McClelland stood over the dying president and directed the efforts to save him. He observed the president's fatal head wound for about 10 minutes from a distance of less than 2 feet. So this guy had a really good view of what was going on with the president's head.
Possibly the best view. He was right over him, right?
Yeah. He said, My God, he recalled saying to his colleagues, have you seen the back of his head? There's a wound in the back of his head that's about 5 inches in diameter. And after about 10 minutes, Kennedy's breathing and heartbeat ceased, and the Secret Service came and took the body away. Now, McClelland concluded, on the basis of what he had seen that day, and what he saw in a home movie of the assassination taken by a bystander, which is probably the Zapruder film.
Yes, sir.
That Kennedy had been struck by a gunshot fired from in front and not behind. That bullet came from the grassy knoll, the picket fence, McClelland said of the fatal shot, referring to the area in front of the presidential motorcade at the moment the shots rang out. And he stood by his assertion his entire life.
He never backed off of that. Never backed
off of it.
Chief of surgery.
Chief of surgery. I mean, this guy was a superb witness. He was very respected in his profession. He published many books on surgery. He was very respected.
Yes, he was a scholar. He was that I did find out in doing a little bit of research about him for this episode, that he had written a lot of medical books, medical text, instructionary text, I believe. And he was a very well-respected man in the medical community in Texas. And, it's like you say, remember the Lifton book, David Lifton book, Best Evidence. Well, there should be a book called Best Witnesses. And you got to think that Dr. McClelland would be chapter 1 in a book such as that.
Well, of course, and this thing goes on to say, okay, McClelland didn't believe in these wild conspiracy theories. The more relevant point, is that he did not believe in the equally implausible anti-conspiracy theories of the Warren Commission, the CIA, the FBI, and Dallas police, which holds that one man shot JFK for no reason. And this, he maintained that throughout his life.
Yeah. I think the point of what he maintained his entire life was, Lee Oswald might have done it, but if he did it from the front, not from behind. A 5-inch diameter wound on the back of the head, that is in no way, shape, form, or fashion an entry wound in any universe, in any reality.
Right. Now check this out.
Yeah.
So photographs of the autopsy at Bethesda were developed on November 25th, 1963 by Sandra Spencer, who was the chief petty officer in the U.S. Navy's photography lab in Washington. Spencer was interviewed under oath by the JFK ARRB in June of 97. With the crisp, detailed, oriented style of a career military officer, she described in detail how the photographs were made, what they showed, and how they were developed. Now, when shown the JFK autopsy photos now held in the archives, she said flatly and unequivocally they were not the photos she took the day after JFK's death. The head wound she saw on the photograph she developed was much larger than the National Archives photo, and the photographic paper was different too. Between those photographs and the ones we did, there had to be some massive cosmetic things done to the president's body, Spencer said. Now, Spencer's right, and she's another high-quality witness. The autopsy photos don't refute McClelland because they show massive cosmetic things done to the president's body after it was removed from Dallas. And this is all, like you said, goes back to David Lifton's theory and best evidence that the body was altered in some way between Dallas and Bethesda, or at Bethesda. And, this is, one of the most important, incredible JFK witnesses, and he stood by his story. He died at the age of 89 years old.
89 years old.
Yep, and for the last 55 years of his life, he told the same story. He believed the shot came from the front and that the rear 5-inch hole was an exit wound and that the bullet actually entered up near his scalp along the hairline to make that hole in the back. And that also that he believed the throat wound was an entrance wound as well. So rest in peace, Dr. Robert McClelland, one of the good guys.
Vaya con Dios, Dr. McClelland. Thank you. You are to be remembered and honored for sticking to your guns in the face of a lot of adversity, sir. Now, there was reportedly, Rob, one more death connected to the narratives of the assassinations of the Kennedys in the 60s. And we got news from this, or at least the first place I got news was from a tweet by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the infamous Thane Eugene Cesar allegedly passed away August 31st, I believe, of this past August 31st. So what do you think about that? I did not know he was living in the Philippines, and he was, I guess, harder to reach, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, over the years, the people that study the RFK assassination have always tried to somehow reconcile the evidence, the autopsy evidence, that Bobby Kennedy was shot from behind at very close range. And, of course, Sirhan could not shoot Bobby Kennedy from behind from in front of him. Okay? So there had to be another gun in the room. And there was. And it was carried by Thane Eugene Cesar, who had a hold of Bobby Kennedy's elbow, and as soon as shots rang out, he pulled his gun. Now, whether or not he was somehow working with Sirhan, or he was hired to kill Kennedy, when this whole thing went down, or whether it was a pure accident just from the reaction of the shots, trying to get Kennedy out of the way, and accidentally shot him. We just don't know. But like you said, RF Kennedy, the tweet, he's accusing Thane Eugene Cesar of murdering his father.
Yes, he is. I've got it right here, Rob. Let's share it with the listeners just in case they hadn't had a chance to read it. This is a tweet from Robert F. Kennedy Jr., guys. He tweets, Thane Eugene Cesar died today in the Philippines. Compelling evidence suggests that Cesar murdered my father. On June 5th, 1968, Cesar, an employee in a classified section of Lockheed's Burbank facility, was moonlighting as a security guard at the Ambassador Hotel. He had landed the job about 1 week earlier. Cesar waited in the pantry as my father spoke in the ballroom, then grabbed my father by the elbow and guided him toward Sirhan. With 77 people in the pantry, every eyewitness said Sirhan was always in front of my father at a 3 to 6 foot distance. Sirhan fired 2 shots toward my father before being tackled. From under the dog pile, Sirhan emptied his 8-chamber revolver, firing 6 more shots in the opposite direction, 5 of them striking a bystander and 1 going wild. By his own account, Cesar was directly behind my dad, holding his right elbow with his own gun drawn when my dad fell backwards on top of him. Cesar repeatedly changed his story about exactly when he drew his weapon. According to coroner Dr. Thomas Noguchi, all 4 shots that struck my father were contact shots fired from behind my dad, with the barrel touching or nearly touching his body. Now, that would make sense if Kennedy fell backwards onto Cesar, Cesar
Right.
sold his .22 to a coworker weeks after the assassination, warning him that it had been used in a crime. Cesar lied to police, claiming that he'd disposed of the gun months before the assassination. Cesar was a bigot who hated the Kennedys for their advocacy of civil rights for blacks. I had plans to meet Thane Eugene Cesar in the Philippines last June until he demanded a payment of $25,000 through his agent, Dan Moldea. Ironically, Moldea penned a meticulous and compelling indictment of Cesar in a 1995 book and then suddenly exculpated him by fiat in a bizarre and nonsensical final chapter. Police have never seriously investigated Cesar's role in my father's killing. Now, the mention of Dan Moldea there, that tells me that RFK Jr. Is very well versed in the details of the case of his father's death. You know what I mean? As a matter of fact, last year, I don't know if you remember hearing it, but last year, there was a podcast that ran a 10-episode, just a little 10-episode series called the RFK tapes. And Dan Moldea was sort of the subject of the podcast. And he was vehemently in defense of Cesar throughout the arc of the whole thing, to the point of profanity and yelling and anger. It was a very interesting series to listen to.
Well, I'll tell you why real quick.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I guess for his book, Moldea commissioned a lie detector test by this fellow named Gelb, Gelb is his last name. And I'm going to read you just a little bit of some of the questions of the lie detector and the results of it. So some of the questions are: between the ages of 28 and 45, other than your kids, did you ever hurt anyone? They answered no. Regarding Robert Kennedy, did you fire any of the shots that hit him in June of 68? No. Is today Wednesday? Yes. Could you have fired at Kennedy if you wanted to? No. Were you involved in a plan to shoot Robert Kennedy? No. Now, after the final question was asked and answered, Gelb said, "The test is over. Remain still for 10 seconds, please, Gene. I'm going to have you, as soon as I get you undone here, sign these charts so that nobody can say that there are any charts other than yours." "How'd you do?" "I told the truth," Caesar told him. "I don't know what the machine says. The only thing is, if it picks up your subconscious in a 15 to 20-year period, I might have started an argument and couldn't remember consciously, or I might have hurt my wife maliciously because of our marriage unconsciously. Consciously, I don't remember doing these things. Now, whether that picks that up or not, I don't know. When I told you no to a few things in my mind, I don't remember doing either one of them." Gelb told Caesar not to worry about the control questions. Then Gelb gave him his spot check opinion of the results. "I'll numerically score these charts, Gene. That will take me somewhere around 30 minutes to do carefully, but I've been doing this a long time, and these charts are so clear and so blatant that I can tell you right now that you had absolutely nothing to do with the Kennedy assassination. I can see the way the scores are adding up right now, indicating that you didn't fire a weapon, you didn't shoot at Kennedy, and that you weren't part of any plan to assassinate Robert Kennedy." So, maybe, Moldea believes in this lie detector test. But there's so many factors that can go into it.
A lot of factors. I find it interesting that Robert Kennedy Jr. calls Moldea his agent.
Yeah.
In this. So Moldea went from, an assassination researcher to the press agent or the agent of a bona fide witness / suspect. That sounds interesting. I wonder if they, Dan Moldea is an author. I wonder if they have, or are they doing a book together? Maybe, I don't know. Maybe he was trying to get Mr. Cesar to put his story down for the record.
Yeah, well, I think he did do a book back in the 90s. I think this is what this was for.
With Thane Eugene Cesar, his cooperation.
I think this was the last chapter. was the whole surprise lie detector test results that says he had nothing to do with it. But of course, there's so many factors that go into the lie detector test. There's a reason they're not admissible in court. If you believe enough in your head that you didn't do it, you can pass a lie detector, or you can have a pin in your shoe, to throw off the things, or you can take blood pressure medicine to lower, there's so much stuff that can go on here. I think Moldea maybe smelled an opportunity to make a little money off of Mr. Cesar.
Well, I'll tell you, his little 10-episode podcast on Mr. Cesar certainly had more sponsorship dollars flowing through it than this one does. I'll say that.
The big ass brand hams?
No hams for this one. No, sir. All right, now, so Mr. Thane Eugene Cesar, there you go. Whatever that guy knew, if anything, guys, another one takes the truth with him to the grave. Rob, let's move on to Facebook shenanigans. You want to?
Yes.
All right. What do you have to present to us for this segment of JFK Research Facebook shenanigans on Quick Hits Podcast?
Yes, sir. Well, these will be some. It's a good question to get some quick answers and get your opinion on some of this stuff. Okay.
All right.
We have the question put out to a group. Again, I'll spare the name of the person asking the question and the group that was asked in. But here we go.
Okay.
Where was Oswald when the parade passed by the TSBD? Okay. That's the question. You know
what my answer would be to that?
What's that?
I'm just not sure. I know where he wasn't.
Right.
And that kind of negates me even wanting to know for sure exactly where he was.
Right. Well, there's a lot of people that have opinions about where he was.
Yeah, I know the rifle couldn't do the shooting, Therefore, the rifle didn't do the shooting. Therefore, that shooter was not in that window with that rifle. Therefore, once you negate that, in my mind, where he was, it doesn't matter. It's where he wasn't.
Right. Right.
Yeah. But I'm sure you got plenty of interesting
Yes.
opinions on that particular query, eh?
Oh, yes. I mean, it's a much bandied about topic, of discussion in such groups as these. And many notable names have various theories about the answer to this question. And we'll go down through them here. I'll get your reactions, okay?
Okay.
One guy says he was in the lunchroom.
All right.
Okay.
Could have been.
Possibly. We know he was shortly before the shooting happened.
Yeah. Cheese sandwich and an apple. Is that correct?
Yes.
Oh, wow. I know my minutia. Okay. Yeah.
It's
possible he was there.
Yeah. Next guy said, in the book depository. Thank you, Captain Obvious.
Thank you, Captain Obvious. Ahoy, Captain Obvious.
Next guy, watching it.
Again, very possible.
He might have been.
May have been.
Next one. Front steps. After shots, he ran to second floor lunchroom to think. He knew he brought a rifle into the building, so he knew he was going to be implicated. He had to plan his move, go home, get a pistol, and hope the real conspirators don't find him.
Well, he did probably stop and think. And he did leave the depository in a hurry. And he was trying to go get the pistol to protect himself. If he brought a rifle to the depository, whether it be the Carcano or one of the rifles that one of the actual shooters used, he didn't do it that day, in my opinion. So yeah, I'm a little 50-50 on that comment. Yeah, I'm kind of with the guy. Absolutely.
All right. Next, on the landing to the entrance of the TSBD, watching the limo drive by, captured an Auction 6 photo.
Could be. I do not have a definite opinion on that particular thing. What about you?
Well, I do have a definite opinion on that, and it's Billy the Lovelady, goddammit. It's not E. Oswald. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good night. Move next.
Next, yeah.
Next guy, Amen. Out front watching the parade, captured in Auction 6, Darnell film, etc., which this comment is actually incorrect on. The Darnell film captured Prayer Man, which is totally different from the Auction 6 guy, which was Billy Lovelady.
Right.
Let's argue about this and not try to solve it. A while more, shall we? LOL. Ugh. He was outside. Both Hostie's notes as well as Fritz's prove it. Second floor story's a myth. And that was all in capitals.
Wow.
With no
yeah. Easy on the Adderall there, dude.
Yeah. Next up, he's not pictured on the front steps. He's inside eating his lunch.
Well, there you go.
Next.
Cheese sandwich and an apple.
Yeah. Lee was inside. Harvey was outside.
Oh, boy. I do not subscribe to the two Oswalds theory. No.
He was driving the limo. Greer was on the front steps. Kellerman was prayer man, and Johnson was in the lunchroom. Ding, 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 ding. This guy is the winner.
We have a winner.
Oh, boy.
Right into Quick Hits Podcast for your free big-ass brand Honey Baked Ham.
Yes. Next up, this guy's name cracks me up, but I can't say it. Okay, he was in the position of the patsy. He told the truth.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Second floor break room, trying to decide whether he should buy a Coke or a 7-Up.
Absolutely possible.
In the break room and at the door.
At the door of the break room. Could have been. Again, I whether he was sitting at a table eating a sandwich, I don't see that it matters much.
Right. Next guy says, which Oswald? Of course, we've.
Well, yeah, there we go again.
Next guy. My impression is that no one really knows. Ding, 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 ding.
We have We have a tie. We have a tie. That, you know what? That one may be my favorite because it is just chock full of logic and reason.
And short and to the point.
Yes, that is the most logical and reasonable answer to that question I've heard.
Next, doorway and can prove it.
Well, there you go.
Good for you, guy. In the lunchroom, a man came and told him the president had been shot. I don't know that story, do you?
Well, that's the scene. This is someone who has watched a lot of the Oliver Stone movie, because you remember the guy that comes in and goes, "The president's been shot." You remember that? And
yep.
Gary Oldman turns and his mouth opens. So yeah, and Oliver Stone can prove it.
Yeah. Next up, Oswald was in the TSBD lunchroom a couple minutes before the parade was supposed to pass by, according to the witnesses, which means there is no possible way Oswald was planning on shooting the president, especially since he was working on contact with the FBI and CIA and was supposed to be stopping assassinations according to his job description that Robert Kennedy and J. Edgar Hoover knew about because they were his employers. Then minutes later, Oswald was reported to be watching the parade, and he was in the Alston's parade watching photograph as it passed by, according to the witnesses. Now, I think there was some English flip-flop there, but it was not my fault.
Wow. That sounds like someone who has read and studied deeply the work of author Joan Mellon with the Hoover and RFK references there.
Yeah, or the work of Judith Vary Baker.
Well,
and the work of K.
Yeah, but if you in the word, but I was thinking of the Angelo Morgado story.
Yes.
Claim that Miss Mellon endorses that Oswald Angelo Morgado, the Cuban exile, was apparently, according to him, sent to New Orleans to keep the pulse of the Cuban exile community in New Orleans, and he alerted Kennedy. He said, well, there's this guy down there operating this Lee Oswald, and Robert Kennedy said words to the effect, that's Hoover's guy. He's not a problem, right. According to Mr. Morgado. So, yeah, that an amalgamation of things in that comment.
Next, according to Robert Groden, Oswald was making change with a fellow employee to buy his soda.
Very possible.
Next up, and last but not least, on the second floor lunchroom, waiting for a phone call.
That's very possible too. Our friend, researcher Garland Brown, he once told me something that he heard from someone, and I can't remember where he either heard or read, or someone had posited to him that in the paper bag, Oswald actually had a Fair Play for Cuba banner, right?
Right.
That he carried in from Buell Fraser's car. And that I think the theory was that he was waiting for the phone call so someone could tell him, okay, the car's coming, and he was to go outside and unfurl this banner as Kennedy came by. And that was the ploy used to keep him in the building until shots fired by the conspirators.
Right.
Speaking of waiting on the phone call, did I just go way tangential there?
No, I mean, it applies. I mean, it
applies.
To keep the patsy in the building, you don't want to have your patsy out front getting caught in a photograph.
No.
So there had to be a reason that he would have stayed in the building. Either it was, hey, we're going to call you. Stay right here. Wait for this phone call, And I think that's what they were alluding to. But
phone call never comes. He finds out the president's hit. He realizes, oh, no, they did it.
Boom.
And he's got to go get that gun and meet somebody. And that's what I think it was probably the reality of the situation. Again, had he known this was going to go down, I can't see him not bringing the 38 with him. But, that's just me.
Right. All right, Doug, let's get into your Facebook post real quick.
Oh, okay. Now, do you have, sir, the image up Do you have an image where you
I
can
do.
study it? Because we do
do.
have to study this. Okay, here's what I did.
Whole lot of Zapata happening.
Oh, whole lot of Zapata. Yes, sir. Now, what I did was over at the Dallas Actions Facebook page, I was in the process of studies for preparing for an episode, and I came across this really great map of Cuba that shows the Bay of Pigs invasion. This map, Rob, comes from the website bayofpigsveterans.org. Okay.
Yeah, I think we addressed this on one of my shows called Bashing the Bushies.
Yes, and I'm going to address it again on an upcoming episode of the Dallas Action in way more detail. But
we need to bash it some more.
And way more opinionated too, I might add. Our producer Grant can attest to this because it has already been recorded.
Ooh.
But yeah, so anyway, it is regarding Operation Zapata, the Bay of Pigs invasion, and how it got its name. Now, first thing I did was I took a good screenshot of this. Now, what's unique about this map is that this is an actual map of the invasion. You can see the invasion points on this map with arrows: Red Beach, Blue Beach. You know, some of the people landed over here at Red Beach. Some of the people landed at Blue Beach, and that was the operational designation given to the beaches. Do you see those?
I do.
That's exactly where these guys landed that day, that morning. Now, I posted, this was the caption that I typed when I posted this map, and it has to do with the nonsense, the myth that the Bay of Pigs invasion's operational designation came from George Bush's oil company, okay?
Yes.
This is what I typed. The caption read, "This is a genuine magic map, for it causes mental clarity. If you stare at it long enough, you realize exactly how, in reality, the Bay of Pigs invasion actually got the operational designation Operation Zapata, and consequently you stop believing utter and complete fanciful nonsense." Boom. Instant clarity. You're welcome. Now, Rob, look at the map very carefully. And we're going to explain what I meant here. When you're looking at the map, what do you see to the, let's say we'll look at Red Beach, where I believe that was CIA officer Grayston Lynch leading the force that landed at the Bay of Pigs on Red Beach. If you look to the north and west, what do you see north and west of Red Beach?
I see a lot of Zapata. There's a there's several things named Zapata. There's Zapata Bay.
Yeah.
The Zapata River, the Zapata Mountains.
North, you have this giant swath called Zapata Swamp.
Yep,
to the
Zapata
north and
Swamp.
west. To the south and east, you have an equally giant swath called Zapata Swamp. And you also have the Zapata Peninsula. Okay, here's how it got its name, guys. And this is what I was trying to illustrate with this map. Let me see if I can put this in simple terms. The Bay of Pigs actually lived at Zapata. Zapata is where it lived. Okay, if the Bay of Pigs invasion was a puppy, we would call its doghouse Zapata. The Bay of Pigs, it's a geographic reference. The Bay of Pigs is actually located on the Zapata Peninsula, surrounded by the Zapata Swamp. It had nothing to do with George Bush's oil company. Now, if it's true, Rob, if you stare at this map long enough, you'll realize. But what I learned by posting this on Facebook is that some people have to stare longer than others. I got a few interesting replies out of this. Of course, not even dealing with the subject. This one individual comments, but it was intended to fail and would always have required executive action. My reason for this conclusion is simple. None of the biggest and best players were involved. It almost looks like a B-team operation, and Dulles was out of contact on a book lecture tour and therefore not in direct control.
Da-ding.
This person comments, so it's just a coincidence that George Bush's oil company was Zapata Oil Company? Yes, that is kind of the point of the post. It is just a coincidence. I replied, Zapata is a geographic reference. Zapata is literally where the Bay of Pigs is actually located. Makes sense, he replied, but Zapata Oil was involved as well.
Well, Zapata also means something else. And we addressed this when we were bashing the Bushies. It's a name of a guy who was a leading figure in the Mexican Revolution.
Yes.
In the early 1900s. He was very revered, looked up to, and thought as a revolutionary, a Latino revolutionary. And thus things were named after him, including a peninsula, a swamp, by people who looked up and revered him, by an oil company.
And not just in Cuba, all over Latin America. All over Latin America.
All over. Emiliano Zapata is his name. Died in 1919.
That's exactly right. And the most measured reply I got to this post was from Mr. Larry Hancock, author of Someone Would Have Talked.
Ooh, yes.
Yes. He replied, not to mention that by this point in time, we have the full details on all of the various ships, landing craft, and even the tanks used in the landing. And amazingly, the Bush family supplied none of them. All of the transports were essentially loaned covertly to the CIA by the leading investor in the Garcia shipping lines, except somebody forgot to think about the fact that the ship's captains and crews had not volunteered for combat. Hence the rapid departure of two of the ships deep into the Caribbean, abandoning the forces on the beach. As to the other ships, like the Barbara J and the Blarger, they were actually bought by the CIA from the Navy at a horrendous price, and neither was really seaworthy when the CIA took possession. Now, one guy comments, so the names of the ship are purely coincidence too? And yeah, it's purely coincidence. Number one, Barbara Bush never had a J in her name anywhere. Right. Anywhere. But here, you know what I found out recently, Rob? You know how they got the name of the Barbara J? You know where they got, or you know how they got that name? They came to that name. See, they needed a fake name for the ship. Right? So they had to give it a different name. They had to give it a fake registration and all this stuff, to put it out on the water to use operationally. So well, the original,
the Barbara Crowley would have given it away too easily.
I guess, yeah, that's way out there, man.
I know.
But the original name of this boat was the Betty S. So they just looked at it. What is Betty S? Female name, starts with a B, initial, Betty S. So somebody looked at it and went, okay, we'll call it Barbara J. It's simply a variation of the boat's true name.
Very clever.
Betty S, Barbara J. That's simple. That's how that boat got its name. And yeah, I had more people, comment, 4 or 5 more people. Well, he married a girl named Barbara J. No, he did not. He absolutely did not. It's absolute. I don't know what's it. It's making a mockery of logic and reason. That's about the nicest way I can put that. Poppycock. Well, Rob, that is about all I had for this edition of Quick Hits. What about you?
I got one more thing. I'm reaching my hand. Our dusty mailbag.
We have mail.
And I'm feeling a lint ball here.
Not fan mail, Grant. We put a no, we do not get to that.
Hold on, I think I got something here. Oh, nope.
Is
that
it
was
wet?
just a piece of the bottom of the bag. Hold on. I could have
Go
sworn
pick it up if it's wet.
I got it. We have one email from our listeners from our first show. This is our first and only email that we've gotten so far.
I can't wait for this.
Are you ready? And it's from frickin', guess who it's from?
Ooh. Jim DiEugenio.
Close.
Really?
St. Nicholas.
I got nothing. I'm sorry.
I'm not shitting you. This is from St. Nicholas.
St. Nicholas.
Old Santa Claus himself. Okay.
All right.
Here we go. Hey, Rob and Doug. I enjoy your all's podcasts. I, too, have looked into the assassination since I was a kid. It's amazing how much the mainstream media has distorted things since day one. I do love that even in their propaganda for Oswald being the killer, they always somehow include information in their documentaries that totally counteract their narrative. Anyway, my question is, what do you think about Joseph Farrell's theory about the Nazis being involved in the assassination? After watching the Mystery Quest episode on Hitler's supposed skull, and then it turned out not only to be his but a woman's, and him making it to South America, and the possibility of Roswell not being aliens but really Nazis, I can see it being very probable they were involved. Now, I do know that both you guys and Ocelli have disproved some of the assassination theories Farrell has borrowed in his. I just want to know what you and Doug think about the theory apart from the borrowed misinformation. Thanks for all you guys do. Love, Nick.
Mr. Nick.
Saint Nick.
Saint Nick. If you mean like people who were German and Nazis during World War II and then came to America and inserted themselves into the intelligence networks, no, I do not believe that. I think the people that did this, to the extent they can be called Nazis, they were violently, venomously anti-communist, and may have had Nazi leanings. People like General Walker and Leander Perez, and the hard right bunch, the John Birchers, the Minutemen, those kind of people possibly, but real. If you're talking about the exiled and outlawed Nazi network post World War II, then no, I do not believe that.
Like Otto Skorzeny.
No.
And, getting into all that, these guys.
Reinhard Gehlen is another name that comes up a lot, especially if you follow the work of Abe Russell.
Right. And, the OSS at the time, were able to expand their scope of things using the Reinhard Gehlen Nazi spy network. It gave us a big advantage over the Russians, and it evolved. We kind of sucked them out. We kind of picked pieces that we wanted here and there, and of course there was Operation Paperclip.
Yeah,
and I can't remember the name of the woman that wrote that book a couple years ago that implicated the fact that I believe she was implicating the fact that there were I think some of Joseph Mengele's horrible what do you call them
experiments
were actually in the craft that crashed at Roswell and not actually aliens.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
But
really, I think we kind of sucked up the Nazi intelligence network after World War II. If Hitler survived, and there's evidence that he might have survived and made his way to Argentina, I don't think at that point he was worried about anything other than laying
survival,
low, staying alive, living his best life, and just being done with everything.
I don't believe Hitler
in exile.
No. Hitler and Bormann did not assassinate JFK by first infiltrating the CIA's anti-Castro operative network. No. And that's where I think ultimately the thing comes from. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But thank you, Nick, for your question, and I hope we answered it the best we could. And if you would like to get your question and reaction from myself, Rob, and Doug, please send your questions or comments to quickhitsjfk@gmail.com.
That's quickhitsjfk@gmail.com. And we will endeavor our best to answer them cogently and coherently. Will we not, Rob?
We will.
All right. Well, that's all I got, Rob. What do you think?
That's it for me, buddy.
All right. Before we close out, guys, I want to remind you to catch me, Doug Campbell, on the Dallas Action, presented by Wall Street Window, a podcast featuring in-depth evidentiary analysis. Did I say that right, Rob? Evidentiary analysis of people, places, things, events, and ideas within the narrative of the conspiracy that assassinated President John F. Kennedy. You can look for us on Spreaker, Stitcher, the Tangent Bound Network, the Wicked Radio Network, or just Google the Dallas Action Podcast to listen and enjoy.
That's right. And you can catch me on the Lone Gunman Podcast. Just search for it wherever you listen to podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, anywhere, any podcatcher. I'm out there somewhere, or just Google it. You will find it and enjoy. If you like what you heard today, there's much, much more from both Doug and I. Probably combined, we got 300 shows in the can, in the archives, all for you for free. Make sure you check it out. That's it for me, Doug.
For producer Grant and Rob Clark, I am Doug Campbell. Thanks for playing along, guys. We are out.